Hi, my name's Mike Roberts. I'm one of the railway mission chaplains and I work supporting staff across the rail industry. And I'm based up here in the northwest of England. And today I'm really excited to introduce a second go at the session, The Power of Forgiveness with Mina. During Rail Wellbeing Live, we hosted a session where Mina talked about some of her experiences and some messages around well-being, forgiveness, and the trauma that she'd experienced. And unfortunately, the session was dogged by a few technical difficulties, and so we're re-recording it today so it can be made available on Rail Wellbeing Live on demand. So anybody who wasn't able to join in or wasn't able to be part of the session can join in today. So please do stay with us. Listen to Mina's message. Listen to some of those big themes around forgiveness we're going to talk about, because there is some really powerful stuff that we talked about last week that we're excited to talk about again, and the impact that it can have on our well-being for all of us. So I'm really pleased to introduce Mina. Mina will introduce herself and her own story. But if you do want to follow up more, I'm going to, She Speaks, just give a bit of a plug for Mina's book, which is an inspirational read. It's not an easy read in places. I don't think some of the subjects she covers can be easy, but there is some really powerful stuff, both from her story and challenges to how we live our own lives as well. So Mina's book, A Better Tomorrow, available from all the good bookshops, probably some bad ones as well, I don't know, but get it from just about a lot of places. I keep seeing it since I've picked it up, but please do consider having a look at that if you've got some more questions afterwards. But it's a real delight to welcome Mina to Rail Wellbeing Live. It's a real delight to be able to put a face to the story that I've read, and someone to such a powerful testimony of a journey that none of us would have wanted to have gone through. So I'm going to hand over to Mina. She's going to do her introductions to who she is, why she's here and her story. And then a little bit in, we're going to stop. We've got the questions from the original session. We're going to have another chat, and then Mina will speak again and we'll have some more Q&A at the end. So Mina, over to you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I'm so pleased that you can actually see me this time. It is a bit of a miracle because I am a Luddite. I've had to understand technology and move with the times, but it doesn't come with great ease. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk to you and also share my story. I'm Mina Smallman. I was born Wilhelmina Adedekumbo Nosimotu Agbe. That's a mouthful. My father was from Nigeria, a place called Ibadan. And my mum was Scottish. She came from a place called Cowden Beef. When I was growing up, I used to call it cows and beef. And people used to get a bit confused. But I'm sadly often known as the woman whose two daughters were murdered in a park in Wembley. And I'm so much more than that. But I don't shy away from it because it's given me an opportunity to become an activist once again in my life. My focus is on the safety of women and girls. Sadly, if you know this story at all, it was prominent because of what two police officers did. And they were guarding the crime scene because the girls weren't discovered until quite late in, nearly 36 hours before their murder. We were let down by the Metropolitan Police. They wouldn't take our calls for missing persons seriously. But what really snowballed the story were these two police officers who were guarding a crime scene decided that they would go into the crime scene and take photographs of their bodies. One of them superimposed his face on the bodies, and then they shared it on a WhatsApp group. And there were 44 members on that WhatsApp group. And at the time, the commissioner, she did an announcement on a news outlet, and she gave the impression that she'd never heard of such an awful thing. Her words were, "If this is true, then it is, disgusting." But in reality, she knew there was also already a huge problem with WhatsApp groups with the police, because the Charing Cross branch were already in a massive investigation. The IOPC were investigating it. So we were let down, and I very quickly discovered, as in large institutions, having been a secondary school teacher for some nearly 20 years, and then as a priest in the Church of England, and then an archdeacon, it came as no surprise to me that institutions often, instead of taking accountability of their wrongdoing, they often try to conceal it. They try and conceal it because they don't want people to realise that they've got brokenness within them. And the sad thing about that, the only people who benefit from that are the perpetrators. So, the child molesters, the paedophiles, the criminals, the people who are involved in corrupt behaviour, they're the ones who benefit when an institution covers up their tracks. One of the questions I'm asked after doing and during interviews is, how do I manage to maintain, a calmness and a balanced view? Well, I've never really gone for that idea of demonising groups of people. When I was a teacher, I used to hear it all the time. Oh, teenagers or kids, they're disgraceful, they can't be trusted, they're badly behaved on buses. And I didn't appreciate that, and I didn't believe it to be true. And as I was growing up in the 70s, that idea that it's Black people who commit muggings, and, the crime is Black people. Well, that isn't true either. So I really don't ever want to be part of a group that demonises, because again, the people who benefit are the wrongdoers, the people who want to marginalise us and stop us from seeing ourselves as part of the human race. And today there has been a historical moment. We have our first female Archbishop of Canterbury. And it was interesting, when I watched it on the television, there was a heckler, obviously someone who doesn't believe that women should be part of the priesthood. And during my time as an archdeacon, you have two branches who are very anti-women who are ordained, and that is the conservative evangelicals. They don't wear clerical clothing. They believe that that's all fancy dress. And then you have the Anglo-Catholics, who really celebrate the ritual of robing and all of that theatre and drama. But once again, I found, as an archdeacon who had quite a few of these churches within my jurisdiction, I found being fair and measured and trying to accept the other's point of view gave me an opportunity to work collaboratively with these people. My challenge now is how I maintain that forgiving heart. And where does that come from? Well, the truth of the matter is, I hadn't really sought it or fought for it or wanted to make it happen. I was being interviewed by Michelle Hussein on BBC News. And the question she asked me after the trial was, have you forgiven the murderer? And as I've said on numerous occasions, I never want to know the questions beforehand. And when she asked me that question, I did a quick scan in my mind and my body, and I could say to her, honestly, I already have. And that wasn't through, my own ability to manage my own emotions. It was a gift. And Christians call it, it is a blessing from God. It is God's grace. It's not something we can earn, but it is a gift. And the reason that it is a gift, and it was very much a gift from me, my whole personality is I would be constantly ruminating and thinking about ways that this person could suffer. And I would be the person then that was trapped. I would be the person imprisoned in a time, and God took that away from me. And conversely, I was asked recently whether I forgive, I call them the despicables, the two police officers who took the photographs. And no, I haven't. And it's not that I ponder on ways I'd like to see them suffer. It's kept the fire in my belly that actually we have to work on institutions. I work with the Met, and bless him, Sir Mark Rowley, the commissioner, he takes my calls and we talk frankly about lots of things. I say you cannot fix an institution. So whoever the commissioner is, whoever is working in the Met or in charge of a constabulary, you can never tick that box and say, it's done. We've sorted all of the corruption, the baddies, the goodies. They will always be attracted to these positions. So, paedophiles will seek organisations that give them doorways, open doorways to the vulnerable, as will the corrupt. The corrupt police chose to be in the police because the uniform gives them that entry, the badge gives them that entry. And when I think of poor Sarah Everard and her parents, I have a great amount of respect for, and we support one another and have been at certain meetings and supporting other families who have lost their children. Sarah's mum still has nightmares and she wakes screaming, "Don't get in the car, Sarah, don't get in the car." Sarah would never have got into that car if her murderer hadn't a badge in his hand. He was in plain clothes, but he showed his identification. And that was his passport to enable her to get into that car. And so the work is never going to be done. And I will never give up trying to assist and shine a light on things that are wrong and need to be changed in the police system. With that, I'll pause and I'll just see if we have any questions that you'd like to ask.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came out of the questions last time was when we talk about, because you said about that interview with Misha Hussein when she asked you, obviously didn't know what was going to be asked, had you forgiven the man that did this, the man who murdered your daughters? And you said yes, you had. And how do you know when you have forgiven someone? I think, because I'm thinking about this in terms of what does it mean to forgive someone in a for perhaps people without the religious background in particular. What does it mean to practice forgiveness, and how can it be possible for all of us?
Forgiveness, when it's not a gift of grace, and there is a big difference. A gift of grace, it's you don't have a choice in it. You just then search in your heart and there's nothing there. There's no pain, there's no anger, there is no you're not looking to pay back in any way. So that's a gift of grace. When we try humanly to forgive, and that's the usual way. You know, the gift of grace doesn't happen all the time to everyone, and we can't manufacture it, we can't make it happen. But on a human level, when an injustice is done to us, and we know, sometimes it's a destruction of your reputation, your culture, it's, being physically hurt, being bullied, cyberbullying. The thing you have to do is you have to find a way to distance yourself from it. So you have to almost meditate on it to say, replace this feeling of injustice, suffering and pain from my heart, and help me just move it away from being close to me. And you kind of take that anxious feeling, that angry feeling, and you try and replace it with something positive. Always telling yourself that while I continue to hold on to this injustice, that person still has power over me and they don't
Yeah.
deserve that power, and I will not give them that power, and I will take back my dignity, my self-control, and I will not allow them to have that power over me. And it's a constant, you constantly have to keep doing that until it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and insignificant.
So I think, is there something there about almost saying that when you don't forgive, that the power still remains with the other person as well? And then
Exactly.
forgiveness says, I'm going to start redeeming this situation from the inside out, from me, not from you don't start with them, you start with yourself.
Exactly. And the simple part, I don't do social media, but I understand trolling, I understand cyberbullying, I understand all of that. If we look at that on a practical level, if you respond to that cyberbullying, you have given them a moment of acceptance. And that mantra that the royals use, don't complain, don't explain, is really relevant to, you're not ignoring cyberbullying, you're actually saying, you don't matter to me. And what you're saying about me is irrelevant to me. And people who love you and care for you will think and say the same thing. Don't give them
So,
credence, don't give them that power.
so one of the questions we had last time, that was a very practical question that kind of, I think, links in with this. Someone messaged in and said, I went with no contact with one of my parents for a long time, and I wonder, how can forgiveness exist without accountability, and how do you forgive in a way that prioritizes your own healing without minimizing the harm that was done? And I think
I
that
remember
kind of links together,
that.
doesn't it?
It does. It's a very important issue when it comes to parents and people who should love us and care for us let us down. I want to share a story. This Monday, um, a few weeks and months ago, I had a mini meltdown, and I recognised it was time for me to begin therapy. You know, it sounds ridiculous. You have to be ready to have therapy about trauma and so on. And for those of you who've read my book, my trauma started very early in life. At 9 months old, I was given to a foster family, and I stayed with that foster family till I was 5. And then at 5, I was then given back to my family. So I had 2 major separations as a child, traumatic. But my mum suffered with a personality disorder and could be very, very cruel. Now, in my book, I tell a story, and I've told this story all my life as a little funny joke of my childhood. And what I did until I was quite old, actually, I would play with my earlobe and suck my tongue. And in order to be able to do that, I would do this in the street at the the bus stop, and while I was waiting, I would prop my arm, my elbow, I'd put the other arm and hold it like a shelf so I could twiddle my ear and suck my tongue. And I must have looked quite comical. And my mum, I can remember being at the bus stop, and my mum I'd be so in a daydream, she'd clout me round the head and say, "The bus is here, get on the bus." It really annoyed her, this thing that I would do. And I always told that story as like a little funny story. But over this last week, I've been addressing, the trauma with my counsellor, the trauma. What has these traumatic moments meant for me? And for the first time, I recognised that what I was actually doing was an expression of a child who was self-soothing themselves and daydreaming because they couldn't bear the reality of where and how they were living and who they were with. And I'm 70 this year, and it is the first time that I have cried about that and accepted that it isn't just a funny little story. It's a manifestation of a coping mechanism. And so sometimes we have to visit trauma over many years. And it's not that we haven't forgiven, it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And my mum, as she got older, she rewrote history. She would tell stories, or we would challenge her on something, and she would retell it in a way where she wasn't the villain. And various times in my life, I would get really angry about that and say, that isn't how it happened at all. This is what you did. And, people like to say, well, that is your truth. But my truth is this. Now, that can be really frustrating. But all you can do is tell your truth. Tell your truth. Hold on to your truth. And just because the person won't accept it doesn't mean it didn't happen. And it doesn't mean that when you've left that space, that they are not wrangling with their own conscience. You have no control over that. All you can do is tell your truth, and the rest is up to the person. So be in control of what you can control, and don't allow yourself to be disheartened because the aggressor won't accept what they did to you. You know what they did to you. And that's the important thing.
And I think there's something in there, isn't there? I think when you said you cried about it for the first time, and the place of tears is really important, isn't it? Because one of my favourite quotes is a J.R.R. Tolkien quote where Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings says, "I will not say do not cry, for not all tears are evil." And that to me is a massive statement. So shall I let you carry on just for a few minutes with the next part of your story, and then we'll come together again at some more questions at the end, Mina?
Well, why don't you give me another question, and then
Okay.
we'll see how we go? Because I'm aware that, people can hear me talk on lots of different things, but actually people may have questions that might be helpful to them.
There are absolutely questions. Mina says there are other places you can talk. On the day we recorded this for the first time, I mentioned if you want to see a bit of sort of Mina as the whole person and look at it in a different way, if you go on to BBC Sounds and search on Desert Island Discs, I think was that a couple of years ago now?
No, it was just
But
last year.
was it last year? And then it is a really powerful sort of not just of the last 5 years, but the whole of your life. And there's a few little bits that I listened to a couple of songs from it that then made me go and listen to whole other albums and things. But your story comes across very well from all that. I spent an evening listening to Blood Brothers after listening to that. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, so please do go and find that on BBC Sounds. One of the questions that came up that kind of goes on from here is, how did you turn your grief and anger in towards purpose without suppressing your own emotions and your own grief process?
Sadly, I've had a lot of practice at turning frustration and anger into something positive. Um, I became a teacher, and specifically a drama teacher, because I thought, well, I knew drama and theatre and acting and all of those things are a wonderful vehicle to explore human emotion and express human emotion. And I'd always been interested in theatre, and I think it started with my kind of imaginary life. I would have dolls and things that, I was quite a lonely child once I left my foster family, and so I created a world with my dolls and a whole kind of community, and that just developed through the years until I went to the Central School of Speech and Drama, not as an actress, but as a teacher. They had a teaching department, and I flourished. And I then later went on to study drama therapy, and I introduced that to my work. And, I would work with teenagers on lots of topical issues and identified trauma and issues where there were problems, and I could explore it. So if there was bullying in a particular form group, I could explore that and kind of dissect that with the students and find the core of it and how to express and why not to do it. I started teaching in 1988, and that was AIDS was really prominent. So I did a lot of teaching around AIDS, and also sexuality, and also did sex education. I decided, form tutors had to teach it. And I looked at my year group and I thought, would I really want him to teach me, sex education? He's not even comfortable with himself. And so I volunteered to teach all of year 9, because I taught all year 7, year 8, year 9, and to teach sex education. And rather than teaching it the birds and the bees, I was able to teach it from the aspect of relationships and, the importance of having in a relationship, and, that sex wasn't just, a vehicle to exercise your masculinity or your femininity. And that is really current now. When we think of those incel groups, um, the young man who killed our daughters, he was involved in an incel group. He was also, at one point, um, looked at as having, perhaps really dodgy thoughts, and it turned out he was it was a Nazi. It was he saw himself as an Aryan race, and that's ironic because he was Iranian. But this issue now of the Andrew Tates and people like that having a grip on our youngsters and filling their heads with nonsense, toxic masculinity, that if we don't take charge of our young people and answer their questions, if you think of the drama Adolescence, there was so much truth in that, and we need to ensure that the void in teenagers wondering about themselves will be filled by the negative unless we fill it with positives.
So thinking about that, because obviously your journey, which you said is sort of 70 years coming up, you've been through experiences that no one would wish on anyone. And I think in the last session, you called yourself a member of a club that no one would want to be a part of, which is a phrase that really, really struck with me. And I'm thinking about all those experiences, both sort of since that day in the park, but also through all the things you've been through before. Has there ever been a time, and this is one of the questions that have come in, during your journey, has there ever been a time when you've really surprised yourself with the strength that you've had or the strength that you've used to keep going? Has there ever been a time when you sort of, like, because obviously there have been numerous times where people are surprised what you can stand up and you can talk about some of the things that you've shared. Has there ever been a time you've surprised yourself?
No, but that people surprise me. I'll give you an example. The Desert Island Discs, it won an award, and I was told that I was nominated, and so the Desert Island Discs, I was told that I'd been nominated for one of the best interviews. Now, I assumed it was one of the best interviews on Desert Island Discs 2025. And I thought that's really unusual and I thought, let me have a look who did Desert Island Discs 2025. And there are people like Cher, and I'm thinking, really? So I was set up to do this interview, and the interview was talking to the people who'd been nominated, the shortlist of the nominees. So I agreed to do a video call with the person who's doing this competition. And, while I'm waiting, I was just saying, I'm really surprised. I don't know what this is all about. And so we go live and we've got Lauren Laverne. She said, Lauren Laverne's here as well. So they start asking me these questions. And I'd said, I was looking at the people who'd done Desert Island Discs, this 2025, and I'm really surprised and honoured to be nominated. And the interviewer said, no, it's not just Desert Island Disc, it's the best interview on BBC Radio 2025. So I went from gosh to, oh my goodness. I said, wow, that's huge. And so she then said, well, I'm happy to announce that you actually are the winner of the best interview on BBC Radio 2025. How do you feel? And the first thing I said was, oh my goodness, you got me. You really got me. I thought I was going to be talking about being a nominee. And it made me cry. It made me cry. And, I was sort of wiping away the tears. And you can see it on if you go on BBC Sounds, you'll see it. And I get surprised by the love, the support, the encouragement that I get from people that I've never met. We've had letters sent, it's just from all over the world, that says, "Dear Mr. Postman, can you send this letter to Mina Smallman?" And they find their way here. You know, we lived in Ramsgate. We've now moved to Birchington. But our postman and people know who we were. And they would just put these letters through the door. And all ages, all races, every kind of person that you can ever imagine, just writing letters of pure love and encouragement, and you know, people who are in the force and feel humiliated by the despicables. You know, I had one letter that came from a priest in New Zealand, and he said, we did a service, and he sent me the order of service, and he did it with the indigenous people, the Maoris, and part of the service was in Maori. And he said, you know, we're reaching out to you and we're sending our love to you. And that surprises me, really surprises me. And I have someone who reached out, and the reason I have a book is because an editor and someone who works with books and so on, he wrote to one of my colleagues, archdeacons, and said, can you send this email on to Mina Smallman? And he said, I feel you have a book in you that you need to read, you need to write. And that is how the book came about. And so I am surprised and pleasantly surprised. You know, my life has given me the toolkit to be able to cope, to stand up in front of people and talk. You do that as a teacher, you do it as a priest. Some of it is just driven by sheer determination. After the court case, the murder court case, you know, I spoke to the press outside the Old Bailey. And when the verdict happened, I spoke to lots of people outside. And then suddenly I could feel I couldn't hold it any longer. And I had to run inside the Old Bailey. And I broke down. I was inconsolably in tears and I was taken to a quiet place. The taxi came to pick us up. I was still crying. The taxi took us to where I was staying with my friend, a priest that I trained with. I cried. I must have cried for about half an hour, 40 minutes. I had nothing left in the tank. I clearly was holding it all together to be able to get me through it. But I'm not surprised that I stand and speak for all women and girls, because I've spent my life speaking up for those who couldn't for themselves. And as I've said in many interviews, now I'm doing it for my girls, and I'm doing it for our very elite club of parents who have lost their women, children and females to acts of violence at the hands of men.
I think one of the things you said last time, which again stuck with me, was, and we'll move into the last question after this, was you said there was a story about a taxi driver who you said to, if I have to change people going around one at a time, I will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
So when I pick up your book, and there's bits where I've left notes and stuff, there was a phrase that where the titles come from, where you wrote, "It's about believing in a better tomorrow. Despite everything, this is a story of hope." And it would have been really easy when someone said to you, "I want you to write this book, Mina," for you to write a book where we all come away and said, "She's had a really, really rubbish life. I don't know how she's come on." But you don't leave that way. You leave at the end of the book with the phrase, "Many of the people's stories I've told share themes about how people get broken and how they get rescued, stories of redemption and forgiveness. And my core belief is that it's never too late to change." And that sort of tops and tails you. And that's why, if people look at your story and read the paragraph, it'd be very easy to think that I'm not going to go and get that book because the world's depressing enough as it is. But there is a story above everything else of hope, of strength and resilience in there, isn't there? And
Yeah,
so
and
the
it's
question
funny.
is,
And it's
it is,
funny. There are funny bits
yeah,
in it, and you know, Chris and I, we give permission for people to laugh, because often when they meet us, they think, "Oh, we need to keep this." I did the Great British Menu, and the the producers sort of said to me, they're a bit nervous about meeting you, because it's not it's fun show, and one of the regulars is a comedian, and they're a bit nervous about how to do this with you. And I said, no, they don't have to be nervous at all. In fact, this is a lovely thing I've been invited to do, and I will give them absolute permission to do whatever they want, because Chris and I take every opportunity to laugh where we can. And it's not fake laughing. We grab happiness wherever we can. And we invite people to share in. And actually, one of the documentaries, there's two documentaries, Two Daughters, which has been re-released. I think it's on BBC Two. You can get that on iPlayer. And then you've got the third one, which is a three-parter, and it's Murder in the Park, two sisters. And episode one, I'm laughing about when they were growing up and telling the stories about their childhood. And so the book's hard going, but there are so many women out there who have gone through controlling relationships, domestic violence, people who've been abused in their childhood. And actually I'm saying to them, and those who are going through it now, don't let this define you. Find the strength, you're surviving. And that survival is what will ultimately free you. And somewhere in there, find your warrior, find that part of you that has enabled you to survive. Because often mothers will protect their children from the aggressor, huge courage. And so I'm hopefully laying all this bare. I talk about my mental health, I talk about suicidal tendencies, and I'm telling everybody that because I'm a survivor, and you can survive this too. So, it's a book of encouragement not to give up.
I think that's a beautiful way to type, because the last question I was about to ask, which you've just answered before I asked it,
Yeah.
was if somebody takes one thing away from the book, what would it be? And I think that's what you've just said, isn't it? Don't be defined by the traumas and the disappointments and the pains of life, but
Yeah.
discover yourself in it all.
Yeah. And don't don't believe what your aggressor is telling you. You know, they will tell you you're less than. You know, kids in school that are working class or are struggling with, you know, learning difficulties or biodivergent, or, you know, don't let people box you. Don't let people put you in a box that says you're less than. You are not less than. You have purpose. And people who have faith and people who believe know that God never created a waste of space. You know, we all have a choice about who we are going to be on this earth. And why shouldn't you be amazing? That's what
I
I
think
would
that's
say.
I think that amazing message, that sentence at the end, is a perfect way. Who told you can't be amazing? And if there's
Exactly.
something we all take away, that's brilliant and beautiful to finish with. So thank you so much to Mina Smallman, who has not only delivered this last week during Rail Wellbeing Live, but has come back. And it's been, I think it's fair to say, the same core message, but we've approached it a slightly different way. I imagine when you speak, Mina, it's never the same twice. So
Well, I hope
I'm really
not.
grateful.
I
I'm
hope
really
not. And
grateful.
thank you. Thanks to
No,
all of you that have been listening. And I hope everybody gets something out of this.
I'm sure they will. But thank you so much to Mina for coming back and recording this again. And thank you to the team who've made it all possible. Again, I would just recommend A Better Tomorrow, Life Lessons in Hope and Strength, which is Mina's book. Or, as I say, if you go onto BBC Sounds, just pop Mina's name into the search box. You'll find a number of times of her in conversation and discussing some of her story. And obviously, there's so many ways we can take that into our life on the railway as well, and how we can help our well-being by remembering that no one else can tell us not to be amazing. So thank you, Mina, and thank you to all of
Thank
us,
you.
all of you, for joining us. And we hope it's been worth a slight delay in waiting to come and hear this. So thanks a lot, everyone, and have a really great day.
Thank you. Bye.